Kent is also here from the West.
Good afternoon.
I want to go over, because this is a little different format, and some of you may be used to this by now, but it may be new for some of you. So communication is a little different using this format. Nice thing about it is you don't have to leave your building. But it really works best if people are willing to share when we talk, you know, as we go through and share some ideas with you. There is an icon with a hand, and when you click on that, that will let Kent know that you would like to make a comment or have a question, and then we will unmute you so that we don't get a lot of feedback. So that's the hand raised. And then the other way that you can communicate with us is in the chat box or in the question box. And you type something in, and again, Kent will be the one that is monitoring that, and he'll let us know and share that way. Periodically, as we go through, we're just going to call on people and ask for their ideas and to share, so that you're not just hearing Kent's voice and my voice. Anything that I missed that you think we should cover before we move on to the presentation, Kent?
Nope, I think we're good to go.
Okay, let's do that then. So we're going to start just to kind of get an idea of, you're taking time out of your day to spend in this format. What would you like to get out of this webinar? And what are some specific challenges you face with Tier 2 changes and implementation? And just to just kind of remind you that the topic is really the systems team. That's mostly what we're going to be discussing, and a little bit of the framework. But thinking of those two things, what do you want to get out of the webinar, and what are some specific challenges you face? So if we can just have a few people raise their hand, and if not, we're going to call on people at random. So who would like to share? And if you don't share, we would like everyone to at least put something in the chat box so that we know we want to make this worthwhile for you.
Robin Harvey has got her hand raised, so I will unmute her. You are live, Robin.
Hi, I thought the green arrow was your hand up and the red arrow was down, but I'm doing it backwards, so I'm just listening.
But what do you want to get out of being on this webinar, Robin?
We tried to start Tier 2 last year, and our CISA 8 person said, you know, hang on and do Tier 1 with Fidelity this year. So we've been doing PBIS for 2 years. So now we're ready to implement. We're short on time with educator effectiveness, et cetera, everything else going on. So I guess I want to know some specifics on how do we get this off the ground.
And you have been trained, Robin?
Yes.
Okay.
The whole team has.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two other comments in here. One is Michelle Clark. They want to make sure they're doing things correctly. That's what they want to get out of this. There's another question, ideas and resources for SAIG groups, which we will get to in another one of the Community of Learner sessions. There was another question that was, what changes are we talking about? And at this point, I think what we're talking about is really the changes to delivery system. How are we supporting the students, and how are we doing it in an effective and efficient manner that links to our Tier 1 system, that's a continuation of our Tier 1 system. The question again, what do we mean by systems change? So again, rather than kind of having these long meetings to kind of talk about individual students, how are we rapidly identifying students that are needing additional instruction, additional support, and how are we delivering it based on a system rather than the individual person? Anything you want to add to that, Lori?
No, I think there's some, there are some different, it's a different paradigm, Tier 2 is. And you might be using your personnel differently. you know, now you're having to do say groups, and you have to have a time to do those say groups, and that may mean a whole different way that you do scheduling. Each of the different interventions has its own challenge, and usually you have to do some system changes to support the implementation of a particular intervention. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
Those were the comments we got.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you for sharing. So let's begin with just some basic concepts, and then we're going to kind of, at the end, have more of a discussion and networking. So implementation and sustainability. At this point in time, when you get to Tier 2, Tier 1 is not about implementing. You've been focusing on that for probably 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Now you want a Tier 1 system that actually is sustainable, meaning that if you change out your dynamic principal and he moves to another building, or you're a great internal coach and they decided they don't want to do that anymore, you have systems in place that will continue to have Tier 1 being implemented with Fidelity, because it's integrally embedded into how things are done at your school. Tier 2 will build on that sound structure. If we put Tier 2 and Tier 3 in context, behavior support is the redesign of environments, not the redesign of individuals. And that, I think, is one of the paradigm shifts that happens with Tier 2 and Tier 3. We're not looking at a kid who is Tier 2. It's not a Tier 2 student. It's a student that needs Tier 2 supports. So how can we redesign the environment? What supports can we use so that every single student in our building is achieving at high levels? And I think especially depending on how long you have been in education, I was just talking to another group, and when I began my educational journey, that was the beginning of pull-out for special ed kids. And that was supposed to be the magic bullet. Well, now all of a sudden all the students are supposed to be able to succeed in a regular ed setting, and that is a big change for some regular classroom teachers. So that's one of the things that you are working with in terms of buy-in at the Tier 2 level. Reframe thinking from the student can't or won't to building behavioral fluency by adding layers of support. Meaning that just like with the academics, where a student, or all the students are exposed to the curriculum, and if you have an intervention, it's in addition to that. We need things happening soundly at the universal level so that when you have check-in, check-out, they're just getting more positives to correctives. And they're getting more of a chance to practice particular skill sets. At the advanced tier support, again, I'm going to reemphasize this, that it's layering on what you're doing at a school-wide and classroom level. In all your classrooms, the teacher should be delivering positives to correctives at a ratio of 5:1. Check-in and check-out helps the teacher increase that to more like 10:1. But if the teacher isn't already doing a lot of positives correctives, then it isn't in addition to. It's the only thing they're getting, and that's not how it's designed. So we're looking to increase instruction. That would be through your SAY groups and behavioral feedback. When a student is beginning to demonstrate a new skill, the teacher needs to, acknowledge that, hey, I can see this difference. This is what you're doing, and this is why I'm giving you, a 2 on your check-in and check-out form, because I saw these things, and this is just what I want to see. Increased acknowledgement, fluency building opportunities, and positive connections. Sometimes students aren't doing well just because they don't have the fluency. They may be able to do it with you when they're in a SAY group, but when they get into the regular education setting, they have a difficult time, and you are building support so that the teacher can help them build a fluency in the environment in which you want the skills to be demonstrated. And you're also building positive connections, because that's the basis of when students learn. So this is just another review that as you go down on the right side with all of the different interventions, you have an increase of intensity in terms of how much it requires of the staff and time and resources, and you also need more family engagement and more assessment to see if what you are doing is having the impact that you want it to have. So one of the takeaways here to look at, and I think one of the things you wanted to get out of this is, are you doing things correctly? One of the things you may want to take a look at, how solid is your family engagement? How are they invested in this process? Because especially when you get to the wraparound and renew, which is at the bottom here, that happens, the family has a big piece in that piece. It's not just what's happening in the school. Anything else you want to add about that one, Ken? I want to hear a different voice.
About that, no, but I did just try to send a message to everybody. I've gotten a couple questions about whether or not this will be available. The PowerPoint and the session being recorded will be available on our website in a week or so. So we'll email everybody that registered and let them know that it is available for use and download. So.
And I'm just going to pause right now to find out if anyone has any questions or any comments with regard to what I've shared so far. I'm kind of curious about where people are at with their staff buy-in in this whole process. So can I just kind of find out where people are at, where you're at with staff buy-in and also family engagement? And if not, I'm going to ask Kent to call on a few people at random. So appreciate if we have volunteers.
We have Jennifer Poehler. I'm going to unmute you.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. You're live. Jennifer, you will need to unmute your mic. I've unmuted you on this end.
I think the staff buy-in's pretty good here. I mean, for us, but you know, how do you get teachers to really buy into the whole idea of 5 to 10 positives for every kind of redirection. I think that's kind of one thing that we do struggle with here at Longfellow.
Okay. I'm going to tell you that there is a resource on our Wisconsin PBIS network web page, and it's in the classroom management, and it's under acknowledgments, the acknowledgement module. And there is some research in there and some slides that you can use that give you the context of where that 5-to-1 ratio came from, and it actually came from looking at what good management teams, the better management teams have a ratio of about 5-to-1 positives to correctives. And it also looked at, in terms of, they did a study with newly married couples and found they could predict with 90% accuracy if they would stay married based on the number of positives to correctives. So I think trying to connect it to, this is what works with adults, and of course it's going to work with kids. And I think also the coaching model, it's what good coaches do. It's telling the student what they are doing well, and they are more likely to repeat it.
Okay.
So, and I have one more idea, and that is there is some research that says that what you focus on is what grows. So if a teacher is purposely withdrawing positives in their classroom, the class will become more off task. And if they purposely increase the amount of correctives, it will become even more off task. So what the teacher attends to is what tends to increase in the classroom. And I think that's where you want to get the teacher's mindset, that this is a good teaching tool, and we do it to increase student engagement and to increase the skills of the students. I'm going to ask for other people to give some comments besides myself.
Yeah, I'm going to add one thing to what you said, Lori, and then Michelle Clark has a comment on here as well that I'll read. As far as the acknowledgement piece and the buy-in, I think early on, when schools are initially trained, the focus really is on those caught being good cards, and we want to catch the student and we want to build the behavior fluency. But the other part to think about is that it's also about the adult system, the acknowledgement system is really put into place to also help make sure the adults are catching the students engaging in the desired behavior, because that'll allow the students to learn how to self-monitor if they understand that the adults are watching them. So it's a reminder, it's a way to enhance the student culture, and honestly, it's a way to teach and help build behavioral fluency. If you think about it, students come to school having been taught behavioral fluency for years. What's expected at home, what's expected in their community. But when we come to school, we need to teach it to fluency there as well. And the acknowledgement system helps build that, rather than just telling the kid or just being able to say, well, they should know how to do that. So that ratio, the acknowledgement system are all geared toward helping build that fluency. Michelle's comment, with 11 schools in our district, our buy-in varies from building to building. All of us can greatly improve the family engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Especially when we start thinking about Tier 2 and Tier 3. We want families to have been engaged with us as part of our universal. And engagement means schools really are leading with their ears, not with their mouths. How do families have voice? How do students have voice? When we get to Tier 2, the families are going to help start deliver those interventions. So if the families aren't trusting, if the families haven't engaged, if the families aren't working with the school, getting that participation at Tier 2 is going to become increasingly difficult. And at Tier 3, if families are not engaged, Tier 3 won't work, because it is based on the family's belief system, the family's natural supports, all of those good things as well.
Kent, can we get resources to people who are in attendance here? Can we email them some links and things?
Yeah, anything that we want or any requests that we have, we'll send out through the registration link.
Okay, and the reason I say that is because there's two resources I'm thinking of that are in line with this. One is I found a really good video that talks about the importance of a positive climate on student learning, which might help with the acknowledgement system. And the second is that the state has developed some really good checklists that schools can use to assess how they're doing in the area of family engagement and to action plan. And so that may be something that you share with the different schools, so you can really tackle it in a PBIS-like manner to improve that piece. Any other comments?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. So intervention fidelity, this is one of the things as well that is a paradigm shift. In my other life, I was a school psychologist, and I did the angry boy group. And when those kids, got to me, and they never left me for years and years and years. They never graduated. They were always there. There was never a question of, well, how can you tell if this particular group is making the impact that you want? I had no feedback. I would ask teachers to do maybe a weekly progress report, but usually they filled it out like 5 minutes before I saw the student, and it usually was more a reflection of what that student did, like that day, not the whole week. So one of the big differences here is we now have a way of progress monitoring students who are in our interventions. Students cannot benefit from interventions they do not experience, which means just because you say you're doing check-in and check-out, if it's not being done with fidelity, then the student isn't really getting the intervention. So before assuming that a student is not responding to an intervention because of something within the student, you make sure that the interventions are being done well. It's when you're looking at your data, if you see that students are not succeeding at a rate of 70%, I have 10 students in check and check out, 7 of them are succeeding. That's a red flag that you need to take a look at. Is that intervention being done the way it's supposed to? Are the comments that the teacher are making, are they appropriate? Do they know how to complete it? I was working at one school, and we had to have a rubric for the teachers because they were all over the place in terms of what they gave a 2, a 1, and a 0 for. Is the greeter doing what they need to do? Are you selecting the right students for the intervention? I mean, all of those things are things that you take a look at. Interventions are intended to help build behavioral fluency for the student and help students generalize the skills. That, I think, is one of the neatest things about this whole framework, is that, like I said before, you know, I have these angry boys, and they show me that they can control their temper when they're with me, and we did all these role plays, and then they get in the classroom, not so easy. But now you have a system where the teacher knows exactly the skills that I'm working on. They have a way of reinforcing those skills as they see the students using them, and it really helps transition and generalize those skills into the setting where it's really important. So why do secondary and Tier 2 group interventions work? It's a better structure. The students get to practice throughout the day, and the people who are with the students the most, which is mostly the classroom teacher, knows what they should be focusing on. The students have more connections to the school. If they're doing check-in and check-out, they have that greeter that they see in the morning. And that's a really positive experience. And they end up having a more positive experience with their teacher because their teacher periodically throughout the day, at least like 5 times, is giving them some good feedback on how they're doing. It's increasing the knowledge base of the student. I remember research a long time ago that said that, and I don't know what the ethnicity groups are of the students in your school, but black students were more likely to be punished for things that they were doing and much less likely to be given feedback when they were doing something correctly. That was just something that, you know, the teachers aren't doing that on purpose, but what we're looking at is a system where all of our kids are really getting good feedback when they are doing what we want them to do, when they are doing school the way we need them to do school. Inappropriate behavior is less likely to be ignored or rewarded. That's another piece.
Hey, Lori.
Yes, go ahead.
You have a hand raised from Toma. I will unmute them. All right, Toma.
Is there a name attached to Toma?
Looks like Benir Roscivius.
Okay.
Roscivius.
Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie.
Thank you. Go ahead, the mic's yours. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand and unmute you. Or I mean, go ahead and mute you. If there is a question, raise your hand again. Otherwise, I'm thinking it was an error. Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay. You know, with the check-in, check-out, you have that piece of paper that goes home all the time to the families so that they can have some feedback. And you're really working on the student to be able to manage their own behavior. That's ultimately what you want. You begin by giving them additional support, but you eventually wean them off so that they can tell, and that's when you know you've really made it, is when they can manage their own behavior and can tell when they're on and when they're off. Any other comments you want to make about that one, Kent?
I think this is another place where we want to be thinking about kind of how we've done business as usual versus kind of where we want to go. When you think about how we've done stuff in the past, students who have begun to exhibit behavior challenge, behavior struggles, we tended to rely on more exclusionary consequences, which sort of would set in motion a paradigm that said, you know, the behavior is so bad, we eventually push you out of the setting, which is really counterintuitive. If we really want to get behavior under control, we want to make the connections between the school and the student. We effectively want to set up a peer pressure kind of relationship, right, where they want to belong, they want to please, they want to be a part of. So if we understand the intent behind Tier 2, really by building those increased connections, it makes it harder for a student to deliberately choose to act out or to hurt or to push away from something they feel connected to. So when we start thinking about getting to that deeper understanding of Tier 2, we want to go beyond, you know, really what are the interventions to why are we doing them? And Tier 2 intervention with the structure, with the acknowledgement, the connections, and really getting the student the responsibility of self-managing is really moving them toward the direction we want them to go. and it becomes more productive than our old practice. So there you go.
Okay, are there any comments from anyone else with regard to these, or any questions so far in these last couple of slides? Okay. So here are some challenges that we have come across in the past, which is one of the reasons that PBIS framework came about to begin with. A mismatch of behavior and intervention. I used to manage we call them CSTs, collective or collaborative support teams, in the school that I worked at. And this is how they went. We sat down, we were lucky at that time. We had a guidance counselor, social worker, and myself, and the principal sometimes was there, and the teacher was there, and sometimes the parent was there. And we'd learn about what the concern was for a particular student. Then we'd sit around and we'd look at everything that we had going on, and we'd throw all of it at the student. And not much of it was being done at the classroom setting. It was all pretty much on a pull-out basis. And, you know, we really were. We tried to make a match of it, but we had no way of knowing if it truly was happening until the end of the year, and they either succeeded or they didn't. Low intensity, low fidelity interventions for behavior, emotional needs. Basically, we're not supplying the right intensity of the intervention for what the need of the student is. That's another piece where we somehow have not really been able to get our heads around that. Habitual use of restrictive settings for youth with disability. You have them out of the building sometimes, or you have them in another part of the building, or definitely in another classroom. You don't have them with the regular population. High rate of undiagnosed mental health problems. And finally, changing the routines of ineffective practices that are familiar to the systems. I remember once I thought it was a good idea to have a divorce group, and I would go and I would look for all the students that were divorced and stick them in that group. Didn't mean they needed to be in that group. It was something I was familiar with, it was something I wanted to do, and so that's what it was. Versus taking a look at what the population of your particular students are and where is the need. What interventions do we need? Are there particular social skills that our students need? So with that in mind, the intent of Tier 2 and Tier 3 needs to be reflected in the mission and vision values of a school for successful implementation. That means that they're lived day to day and not just words on paper. So what we'd like you to do is kind of take a look at what is your school's vision for PBIS, and particularly in servicing students that may need a little bit more, either in terms of Tier 2 or Tier 3 interventions. What is your vision and what are your values and what's your mission around Tier 2 and Tier 3? And we'd appreciate it if you could just either write in the chat or raise your hand and share. Hopefully some people will share, because I think this is one where we, Kent, if you can maybe, just call on a few people randomly.
Yep. We'll give them a second to volunteer, otherwise, yeah, I'll call on them. Okay, seeing no hands, we're going to, let's see, Tyler Nelson, I'm unmuting you.
Can you hear me, Ken?
We can.
Yeah, thank you.
Our mission statement really just that revolves around PBIS in general is increasing instructional time for all students. So when they get to the Tier 2, Tier 3 level, we're still trying to, for the students who need additional supports, we're looking for ways in how we're going to increase their instructional time by trying to continue to build that fluency piece. And where we're at right now, specifically with check-in, check-out, we've individualized check-in, check-out for some of those students, and also the SCIGs. I think we're looking for is if those aren't successful with a small number of our population, I think our staff is ready for it. It's more like, then what? So are you able to add to that at all, Kent?
No, I think you did a pretty nice job capturing that. I also just got a couple statements that came in here.
Can I just make a comment on that? I didn't hear that you have the social academic instructional groups. Is that because there's no need, or is that something that is structurally a challenge?
We do. We actually have a gal at our school that specifically focuses on some of those groups.
Okay.
So when we're looking at our Tier 2 students, so we start with check-in, check-out. You know, and last year, with the kids that qualified for Tier 2, it worked with 80% of our kids. So that other 20%, you know, then we individualize check-in, check-out for them, and then we also do the SAIGs as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're still not seeing success with those, our next question is, okay, so then what can we do for some of these kiddos?
I think, and you do have the FBA BIP going on, correct?
We do.
Okay. Yeah. I think that is. I think it is a good question to continue to ask. I think I would maybe take a look at what is happening at those problem-solving teams. I think that is probably one of the most challenging interventions to do well. I think it's challenging to get the FBA correct, and then the bigger challenge is, does your behavior intervention plan match what you've identified as the function of the behavior? And have you adjusted the environment enough to have those kids be successful?
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
All right, we got a couple more here, and Tyler, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and mute you again. We have Kristen Lauda, our Tier 2 mission statement: the Shady Lane community will provide positive strategies so that all students can be successful in the school environment. Shannon Clark, the mission of Cudahy School District is to create a safe, responsible, respectful school community that teaches positive behavior to enhance learning. And Dean Hughes, part of our district mission statement relates to students to, quote, conquer their challenges, end quote, and I think we integrate that into our individual building/teams missions.
So this is the question. I know that people came up with these mission statements and visions, and they put a lot of time into how they word them. But the second part of this means live day to day and not just words on paper. So I think to have the Tier 2 interventions really be successful requires a lot of staff buy-in, and that means that they are fully behind what that mission and vision is. And revisiting that, not like a make-run, but what would it take for me to believe that instead of 80% of my class being able to succeed, I believe 85% can succeed, or 90, or 95. What will it take for your staff to individually, wherever they're at, inch their belief system up to 100%?
I think this is also an important point to key in on, especially as you're kind of moving into Tier 2 implementation or sustainability, or even looking at Tier 3 readiness. When we talk about buy-in is going to be one of those adaptive pieces that you really want to be focusing on whether or not it's there. And buy-in doesn't mean that everybody is walking down the hall skipping, chanting PBIS rocks and, all that good stuff. Buy-in means that staff understand this is how your school is going to support students. And you're going to hear, and this is kind of one of those metrics you're listening for. If you still have staff that are saying things like, this student doesn't belong here, or they're having conversations about the fact that this student is requiring too much work, that's not living what your school's mission and values are, right? Because when we think about what a three-tier system, a multi-level system of support is intended to do, we're putting into place structures and supports to reach all students. That means we're putting systems and structures in place that are supporting that kid that, you know, is sort of that TGIF kid, the one that you're putting the Valium salt lick in the teacher's lounge for. That's what we're looking for. You know, and if people are understanding that that's where our target is, that's an indication that people are kind of understanding and that you're living what that mission is. So it's an interesting point to keep coming back to, and I think it's an interesting discussion to have with staff. What is it that we do believe? And what is it we believe about all students and our mission in supporting them?
So I think these are some other questions, but at this point, revisiting the question we came up with to begin with, I know one of the people was how to get it off the ground. That's one of the things that you wanted to get out of this. We didn't address that directly, but did you, I guess I'm curious if you got any ideas around that in terms of where to start. I think we really pressed for the staff buy-in, and beginning with check-in, check-out, you take one intervention and you implement it with the best you can. You take a look at the what your check-in, check-out data is telling you, and that should point you in terms of what intervention you're going to implement next. And that's how you begin the progression. But I'd also like to know if there's, number one, did we answer that question? And I can't remember who asked it. And number two, for other people, what other challenges are you finding that this is meant to be a support, this is a community of learners, what challenges do you have? Because there may be some people that are on this webinar that have the answers and have some ideas. So, for instance, I know that Cudahy has struggled with their FBA BIP process, and Tyler, yours is in place. So maybe I'd be curious as to how you got that in place. Is Tyler willing to share?
Remember, we know who you are. Tyler, if you're willing to share, raise your hand.
Because I have a feeling that there's quite a few people on this webinar that do not have their FBA BIP problem-solving team operating the way they would like it to be operated. So if you have that in place, it would be really nice if you could share how you began.
Thank you, Tyler. The mic is yours.
With our Tier 2 team, we meet weekly on Mondays. We meet 1 week to talk about students and the next week to talk about systems. So one thing that helped last year in trying to narrow down our focus on students is we invited all the teachers that worked with that child to start developing a plan that's going to work best for them. So that's how we moved in that direction last year.
Thanks, Tyler. There is Shannon Clark. We're currently implementing a strengthened BIP FBA process with increased support from our staff. It's operating now at the special education level. Shannon, I'm going to unmute you a little bit to kind of talk about how you were getting some of that. Oh, and there's more. It's going to be a transition to use that process effectively for gen ed students as well. I'm going to unmute you if you can share a little bit more. Just a second. Shannon, you are unmuted.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. At this point, I know our district staff has developed a very fluid process where we are engaging all shareholders to ensure that those individual students are receiving that targeted support for their behaviors. It first starts with, for us, it is engaging our special education support staff along with the student's IEP team, but that's one where I can easily see that in our transition to the general education student level, that if students go through let's say the check-in, check-out process, if they go through the SAG process and those things are still not effective, that we'll be engaging the teams of teachers along with the parents and our social workers to use this FBA process for both a brief or an in-depth process depending on the student need. It's much more scientific. There's a lot more resources that are available for our staff in order to have that process be fulfilled with a timeline that does align pretty well with our other interventions so that we are getting the documentation and having those assessments that we need. I'm hoping that answers the question pretty clearly.
Yeah, Shannon, right? I'm sorry,
Yes.
I don't have names in front of me. So I have a question. Do you feel that your whole staff understands like just those ABCs of behavior, you know, antecedent, behavior, consequence? Do you feel that your staff, your gen ed staff, understands those principles?
At this point, I would say that if it was described in a manner that I think generally they do understand the concept of something happens before the behavior and something happens after, but putting it into the framework of how do we change what happens before or what do we do to modify what happens after, that will be our focus for the general ed teachers to understand that it's something that they can definitely be in control of and that it would be part of their responsibility as part of this Tier 2 or Tier 3 process in order to enhance those student growth in terms of behaviors, that would be something that is going to, as part of that transition, part of that process that I know we're going to be engaging teachers with, and so that they understand the ABC type language that we would be using both at the special ed and general ed level.
Building their fluency as well.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Kent?
I said building the staff fluency as well.
Yeah.
Agree.
We have two other questions, comments, and we have a hand raised as well. So I'm going to, actually two hands raised. So I'm going to take these questions first, and then we'll get to the hands. Shannon, thank you.
Thank you.
Question that we had, some staff that I work with don't want to change their classroom or the environment. I wonder if it's a lack of knowledge or a lack of energy to do something differently. So, Lori, what's your take on that?
Boy, that's a unique one. No one else has a teacher like that in their building. You know, I remember there was I think a slide that you created, Kent, where it was something like, you know, teachers don't have the option to opt out. And I think that's something that you have to work with your administration and with the whole faculty. You don't get a choice in this. If you signed up to be a teacher, you signed up to be a teacher for all students, not just the ones that are easy to teach. So, man, I think it's always good to begin with, maybe it's a lack of knowledge, maybe to begin with asking them, look, what resource do you need to be able to do this? Versus coming down with a stick.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in this. One of them is buy-in, right? Because people have been in education long enough. They've seen initiatives come. They've seen initiatives go. And I think on the surface, people still look at PBIS as being an initiative rather than how a system delivers a service and how a school operates. So I think one of them is listening for understanding. If that person is still thinking that, oh, this is a negotiable, this is an elective, it's going to go away in 2 years, I think some coaching happens there. I think the second part of it is people are human. You know, that adults are human, that we understand that we have to teach and teach to fluency our students, but we kind of forget that we need to do that with adults too. And that as adults, we kind of get in habits, and it's hard for us to break those habits. Part of them is, you know, part of it is working with those staff to say, look, here's some things maybe that we want to think about trying, or here's why these things are beneficial. What is the impact on the student? Because regardless of the person, people go into education because they want to help students succeed. So let's link practice to outcome for them. In the end, and this has happened in buildings that I've worked in myself, where we've had people that have just said flat out, this has worked for me for 40 years, I have no reason to change what I'm doing. And then it becomes a little bit different conversation. But I think that's part of why we have support systems and coaching and we have teams, is to help kind of guide people through their thinking. and how they see it and how it impacts their day-to-day life. So that's a really good question. Have another one, finding the time to meet and plan when there are time conflicts. This particular school, they've worked the time out for Tier 2, but are now running into conflicts for Tier 1. So thank you for that question.
Why don't we open that up and see what other people have done who have had those time constraints? I'm kind of curious what other people on the call have done.
Okay, I'm going to, Tyler and Robert, your hands are up. I'm going to lower everybody's hand, and if there's something you want to contribute, raise your hand, please. If you've got a way that you've kind of worked through that time thing.
Oh, come on, I know people have done this. Everyone has a time problem.
Question or comment that we had is actually from one of our techs, and that is, are the same people in that particular case on Tier 1 and Tier 2? And another request, can we repeat the question? The question was about really finding time to implement and support Tier 2, and they found time to do it, but it's at the cost of Tier 1 sustainability, that the time that they have for PBIS stuff that they're using for Tier 2 is at the sacrifice of Tier 1. All right, we have a hand up. So Tyler, I'm unmuting you. What'd you guys do about this?
Ken, we actually don't have a question at this point. Sorry about that.
Okay, then I'm muting you. No mute for you. All right. Kristen Lauda, unmuting you. All right, Kristen, mic's yours.
All right, so what we did here, our Tier 1 and Tier 2 teams are different. We do have a few staff members that cross over, and that's just by choice. So our Tier 2 team meets about 3 times a month, and then 1 time a month we kind of are foregoing that meeting so people can attend a Tier 1 meeting if they'd like.
Okay, so kind of staggering. Thank you.
Yeah, because Tier 1 does meet more often than once a month, but we freed up one of our meeting times so that people can attend at least one Tier 1 meeting per month.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
You know, one of the things with this is you do have to, we used to have something, we still do actually, it's called a Working Smarter document, taking a look at all the different teams. I think you may also look at the schedule of when different things are happening, and this is something where it takes the administrative support to do, and sometimes you just really have to redesign all the different meetings you have, maybe cut some of them out, maybe use staff differently. I don't know, if there should be more than one time during the whole month that a particular group of people can meet, even though I know that there's a lot going on. I think that's where you need to look.
Yeah, and we do have the tool called the Working Smarter Matrix, which is a chance for you to kind of audit your building and your initiatives and teams and committees and kind of look for places there's overlap, and it's a way to kind of recover some of that. We have a hand up for Melissa Kostka. I'm unmuting you.
Hi, Melissa.
Floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I was just going to say that we've been able to do it 2 different ways in our district. We do have the separate teams. So Tier 1 teams meet, you know, the 1st and the 3rd Thursday of the month, and then Tier 2 teams meet the 2nd and the 4th. We do have one school that is very small, so small in fact that they don't have enough people to cover 2 separate teams. So they are one team, and when they meet, they've just divided up their meeting time, and for part of that meeting, they wear their Tier 1 hats and they go through the Tier 1 agenda, and then for the other part of the meeting, they switch over. The Tier 2 coach takes over, and they go through the Tier 2 part of the agenda, and that's worked out well for them.
You know, one of the things in the design of that I think helps make it work is that you have a different facilitator for each piece of the meeting. When you have one you know, like 1 hour and you're dividing it in two, you really need to find a way to distinguish, hey, now we're focusing on Tier 1 and now we're focused on Tier 2. I heard one school, they actually had a different hat that they wore. They did something fun like that. But you had to do something that really distinguished that we are changing the conversation. Thanks, Melissa.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
We also have a comment, and then we have a question that I'll get to. So the comment around this timepiece is from Heather Retzloff. Tier 1, they meet on weeks 1 and 3, half hour before school. Tier 2, weeks 2 and 4 before school, about 45 minutes. Counselors and associate principals are part of both teams. Otherwise, we have different staff members on the teams. Heather, if there's something more you would like to say, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, I think that's a really good example of kind of how to jockey it and prioritize it. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Tyler's hand is up, so we're going to unmute him.
We have to see if this is like some type of a tick or if he really... His hand goes up sometimes when he doesn't mean to. Go ahead, Tyler.
His hand is down. All right. All right. Question, comment. This school, we have a few, quote, lifers and check-in, check-out. They do well. They move to fade. They graduate, and then the behaviors start coming back. They say they need the DPR to be successful. Do other schools experience this, and is it okay? So before I answer it, hands up if you got some thoughts on this, if you experience it, and what you would like to share. All right, Melissa Kostka, you are on mute. Melissa, mic's yours.
Okay, we have most definitely experienced this. They love check-in and check-out so much. They don't want to be taken off of it, but we do have a fading process as well. This generally happens at the elementary school, and so what we do is we try to move them to self-management where they can still have their DPR card, but they are just monitoring themselves and doing an occasional check-in with their teacher. But for some students who really just we couldn't seem to wean them off without the behaviors reoccurring, we've tried to find a part in the process for them. Maybe they're there with the check-in and check-out coach and they hand out the DPR cards in the morning, or they kind of act as the ambassador, and when new students are coming in, they're there as part of the orientation, or maybe if there's a younger student, they meet up with that student and walk that student to check out every day. So those are some of the things we've done with those kids.
Great suggestions.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so Melissa, thank you. I'm muting you again. There was something that came in. I apologize for that. And let's see, hand down. Anybody else have anything they wanted to contribute around that question? Okay.
I do want to say that if you have a student, oh, is there someone else that has something to contribute, Kent?
No, I was going to go ahead.
It's kind of like, obviously the student really thrives on that recognition, and I think some of the things in Melissa's program that spoke to that is to take a look at how you can have a way of acknowledging student without them necessarily being on check-in, check-out, so that it's more integrated in a natural way without maybe necessarily the form. Just an idea.
I think that's, the attention is one piece of it. Depending on what the behavior is, if it's a student that's really enjoying the attention, if it's a student that is really engaging in that low intensity kind of stuff to get the attention, you know, giving them that DPR and letting them kind of have that in the occasional check-ins, great. If we see behavior starting to become more significant, so when the behavior slides, it becomes a little bit more intense, I'd really start taking a look at moving to that brief functional behavioral assessment, because in that student's case, the behavior is meeting some need that they have within that environment. So really trying to figure out what it is and then how can the environment be shifted to help meet that need. I think it depends, yeah, a lot on what the behavior is, the intensity and all that kind of stuff, but certainly letting them have a DPR and kind of checking themselves is a powerful way. Thanks for that
And
question.
one of the things that I want to underscore with what Kent said is I think one of the things with those brief FBA VIPs is the process of, and the school at Shared is doing this, it's the process of recalibrating at what point do we begin to look at what the function of the behavior is. I think we are used to thinking of it with our special needs students. We need to think about doing it sooner, even with a student who has succeeded in check-in, check-out, but we have a hard time weaning them off of it. And it doesn't need to be such an involved process. It's meant to be brief. But it is more involved when you begin it, because it's a learning curve. Okay, Kent, any other comments or any other?
No, we got through them. So I guess we have just a couple minutes left. If there are any last-minute questions you have, please raise your hand or throw them in the question box.
And we also have this one. Is there something that you're doing in your building that you're proud of that's strengthening your universal or tier 2 that you think other people might be able to benefit from?
Okay, seeing no questions or comments, I know it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We got to practice what we preach. We would like feedback, whether or not this is kind of meeting your need. So if you have specific feedback for us, please email myself or Lori. Lori, can you hit the next slide? There we go. Please email us with any feedback that you have. We will be doing this again in a couple of weeks. Go ahead, Lori.
Oh, I was just going to say that the next topic is check-in, check-out. Is that correct, Ken?
Yes. And one of the questions that we did have about check-in, check-out and Tier 2 in general was family engagement. So we're going to make sure we talk about that a little bit as well.
Okay. Yeah, if you have anything that you just want to type in as a question for the upcoming topic that you want to make sure that we address, if you can maybe put that in the chat box or the question box, and because we get a printout of those questions, that would be helpful. Or you can email us.
All right. If you do not have anything else, Lori and I will kind of hang out here for another couple minutes if you had some questions you wanted to ask but didn't want to be public about it. Otherwise, thank you, and we'll be offering this again in a couple weeks. So you're free to go.
Thanks for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
So then, Kent, we will be able to get I looked at this once before, but you get a whole printout of all the comments made.
Yeah, we'll be able to get it somehow.
Yeah, I picked it up. It's kind of hard to read, but you can read it.
For check-in, check-out, what if the teacher wants to use their own behavior chart? That is a really good question. And
now, is that something that they want us to make sure we address the next time?
That's what I was about to say to Rebecca. If you're still on, Rebecca, we will address it. Short answer is no. You're still going to have one that the school is using, but we'll talk about that more next time. Hand up for Robert Myers. Robert, I'm unmuting you. Hi, Robert.
Yes,
can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I was just wondering, we're starting our first year of Tier 2, and we've started check-in, check-out, but I've been concerned about our implementation of Tier 1, especially with the acknowledgement system. And we do have some grade-level teams who are now exploring Dojo, and I'm wondering if you know of any districts that have used it to try to help increase that ratio. And also, we want to begin to track minors because I guess Dojo has a way that you can keep track of both positives and if you need to, I think they call it ding a student.
Yeah, I know some schools that the Kenosha School District uses that dojo, and the faculty seems to really like it. I know they use it for tracking minors. I'm not sure if they use it for the positives as well, but the teachers seem to like it.
I've got a couple districts, and off the top of my head, I can't remember the school districts that are using it, but I know we've got some in the West. I did.
You mentioned Kenosha, correct?
Kenosha, yeah.
All right.
One
thing that we had difficulties with, a barrier, was just the old culture, the Alfie Cohen of punish by rewards and not wanting to move to any tangible system. And this seems, because it's technology-based, it doesn't seem to have the same stigma of what teachers consider a token economy.
Yeah, I'm going to make a distinction here. I think there is a distinction between rewards and acknowledgement, and I think it's an important one. So,
oh, yes, I agree totally.
And that's a paradigm shift that you really, I think some of the resources, and I think we're going to send some out too, I think that video really addresses that. That's a paradigm shift you have to make in the minds of the teachers.
All right, and which video are you referencing?
Well, it's from Edivision, and it has to do with the power of and how important it is to have a positive climate for students to learn.
All
I
right.
think it's a really nice one to address some of those things.
I think.
All right.
I think
well,
that's
thank
also,
you very much.
Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. One other distinction I think that also needs to be abundantly clear with staff, and when we're talking about token economies, the intent of that acknowledgement system is to help with the skill acquisition and to move a student to self-monitoring. So if a teacher is looking at the acknowledgement system as being a token economy where, you know, the kids doing the work get the gumball and they can trade it in for stuff, that's really not how we want to be seeing that implemented. When the acknowledgement system is being used, it should be predictably delivered, used at a high rate in a classroom in a school-wide setting, but then faded as skill is being acquired, and still being able to be used for maintenance, right? To kind of let the students know that, oh, hey, we're still watching it. And I'm not sure if you were using token economy as shorthand, but I think it's still a distinction worth making.
Yes. Well, when we took our Tier 1, they talked about booster bucks, and I totally envisioned it. When I learned years ago, it was from a behavioral school standpoint, and we did use tangible tokens, but we quickly faded students from that. And what I tried to stress was through the use of tokens, I got used to delivering that high ratio of positives to correctives because of the way that was being used, and I could quickly fade students off that type of system. But I routinely observe classroom teachers, and I just do tally marks of specific positive feedback to correctives or reprimands or whatever, and I'm getting like a 20-to-2 ratio in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that with teachers exploring that they would be trying to catch children being good with the dojo, with using that as an acknowledgement.
Right.
And then after they build fluency on delivering those, because it is an unnatural thing. Teachers, they seem to understand the concept, but trying to apply it, it seems like they go back to old practices of attending to misbehavior rather than catching students.
Right.
I'm going to share with you, if you are doing those walkthroughs and doing the positives to correctives, one of the things that I've done with that seemed to work in terms of improving the ratio is I averaged what it was for the whole faculty. I gave what the range was. Oh, we had one teacher that did one positive to 20 correctives, and then we had one teacher that did 17 positives to 1 corrective. And then what I did was I pointed out specifically, and I said, you know, Dan Miller, this is how he increased what he was doing to get a higher ratio, so that you actually give people the skills and you do what you're asking. You're kind of acknowledging and putting forth what one of their colleagues is doing to increase that ratio. And I think sometimes if they know that their colleagues are doing it, they're more likely to embrace it. And you're not pointing anyone out, but it's like a game you play. How can we increase our ratio? And at least they'll do it when you're in the room, so you know that they have the ability to do it. Whether they do it when you leave the room, I don't know, that's something else. But at least you want them to be able to get more comfortable with having that more positives to correctives.
And my vision is, when I did the observations that wasn't part of a walkthrough, I generally was evaluating a child referred for EBD.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at classroom environments. So I was doing those tallies for quite a few years. I've been trying to encourage the administrators to use the self-assessment form from the modules on classroom management as a tool for a walkthrough observation. But now I'm trying to encourage grade level teams to do peer observations using that same type of form, where you would do that tally and then give each other feedback. So there's not that supervisory capacity. It's more like collaboration between grade level team members.
Yeah, that's the ultimate.
Okay. And I was just wondering, because a couple of the grade level teams are beginning to embrace the dojo system, I want to use that to the full effectiveness. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question.
So is there someone in Kenosha that you would think would be a good contact person?
Jane Larson.
Okay.
And she is their PBIS coordinator. I think it's JLARSEN at KUST. Let me see. Hold on one sec. Yes, JLARSEN at KUSD.edu. Kenosha Unified School District, but the initials are KUSD.edu.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have that we have 7 attendees. Are there still people on?
We do, and yes, we just lost one.
Okay.
So I figure we'll give them another 2 minutes. If no hands raise, no comments show up, we will end the meeting.
Okay. Can you tell what district the gentleman who was speaking was
Yes,
from?
Sturgeon Bay.
Sturgeon Bay, okay. Good.
And we are down to 2. We also have somebody from Sturgeon Bay that's still on here.
Okay. You might just want to ask them if they're still there, if they have any questions. Can you tell if they're attending? Do you have that?
Yeah, one is not.
Okay.
Okay, Jennifer and Belinda, I still have you two in the room. Wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to talk about. Otherwise, we will go ahead and end the meeting. Going once. Going twice. All right. Thank you very much for participating.